Welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb, and I see you guys in the comments. You guys want more budget decks. So today we're going to go over top 10 commanders that I think could be very strong whenever you build them on a budget. You guys can vote down in the comments down below which one of these you want me to build. I'm just going to give you guys a brief synopsis of what the deck would kind of look like, how it would play, what the deck would do, what its strengths are, and then we're going to move on from there. And again, you guys get to vote in the comments. So don't forget to click on that whatnot link, claim your free $15, get 10% off all of your Tolarian Library proxies whenever you use code DT for D, and then we can get right into it. I'm now sponsored with Baron of Dice. This means you guys can get 5% off whenever you guys use the code DT for D or click the link in the description down below. I'm a huge fan of the awesome art on their deck boxes and just the way they look in general, and you can pair up those awesome deck boxes with high quality playmats that match those deck boxes. Thank you, Baron of Dice, for sponsoring this channel. Now, the first one is Zimone and Dina. This is going to be number 10 because honestly, landfall isn't super interesting, but this would be sort of a landfall combo deck. There's a lot of different ways to untap our creatures, but let's get into what these commanders do. For 1 black, 1 green, and 1 blue, you get a legendary creature human dryad that says whenever you draw your second card each turn, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. And then you can sacrifice another creature to draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you control 8 or more lands, you get to repeat this process. So you get a ton of card advantage and a ton of ramp in the command zone and a little bit of life drain. Now, where this gets really strong is where you get the ability to untap the Zimone and Dina whenever a land enters the battlefield, because then you can kind of just keep tapping them, sacrificing more creatures, and as long as you have landfall triggers creating more creatures, you kind of just never run out of creatures and you can kind of just combo off that way. Now, this is kind of landfall combo, boring mixed with more boring, especially for budget players that like to have something a little bit more interesting. But I do think sometimes it can be kind of interesting to build combo in a budget sense, because you can't, include all the tutors that make it super consistent. It kind of becomes a different game of I need to put as much card advantage in this as possible, and I need to put as much redundancy in this deck as possible to make it as consistent as possible. And then at the end of the day, you're just left with a solid landfall commander. So it still does do the combat damage thing. Again, put him at 10 because I'm not super interested in it, but I'm down to build it if that's what you guys want. The next one is Voja, Claws of Conclave. This is a 5 CMC commander, 2 generic, 1 red, 1 green, and 1 white. I love this commander, but in a budget sense, this is going to be pretty brain dead. As Vigilance, Trample, Ward 3, whenever Voja, Claws of Conclave attacks, you get to put X/1/1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control, and then you get to draw cards for each wolf you control. So the goal is you just elf ball, right? You cast all those super cheap elves, get a ton of mana, and then you make a massive board state with Voja. What's cool about this is you get to put the 1/1 counters on all of your creatures, regardless of if they're an elf or not. So that's where the more interesting part is, and that's where we can kind of lean into like creatures that aren't supposed to have big power having massive power. And then additionally, we can put in your mirror entity effects that are budget that allow us to turn all of our creatures into wolves and elves, allowing us to draw a ton of cards. Again, a very strong commander, and I think you could build him very strong on a budget. I just don't think it would be that interesting either. You're gonna elf ball, you're gonna overwhelm the board, and it's going to be strong. But I think everybody already has a picture of what that deck looks like in their head, and they can easily build it. Ruric Thar. I just think this is a very cool budget commander, and I think it just gives a lot of non-budget decks a run for their money. This is a 6 CMC creature, 4 generic, 1 red, 1 green, has Vigilant Reach. Ruric Thar the Unbowed attacks each combat if able, and whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, Ruric Thar deals 6 damage to that player. It is also a 6/6, so this guy hits like a truck, and he kind of just makes you really think about what cards are worth casting for 6 damage to the face. You're not going to Farseek and grab a land and also take 6 to the face, right? So this really slows down the game plan, but only everybody else's, because you're using primarily creatures or you're using a life gain strategy. One of my favorite things to do with Ruric Thar is give him life gain, and then he actually gains you life whenever you're dealing damage and whenever he deals damage. So whenever you cast a spell that's a non-creature spell, you take 6, but then you instantly gain it back. And then it also just gains you a lot of other life because your opponents are constantly casting spells and you're allowed to gain that life as well. So the life gain can get insane with this this guy, and it completely negates the negative that this card has. So I've already actually fleshed that deck out. I built a Gruul life gain deck. I'll put it in the description for anybody interested. I think it's really cool, but on a budget, again, very strong. This slows down all the other non-budget decks, and it actually becomes pretty strong because you're playing a different game. And I think that's what you have to talk about whenever you're talking about bringing a budget deck to a table that's not playing budget. You have to bring a different game and make them play that game, and Ruric Thar does that. Ruric Thar says, hey, we're going to make everybody take a ton of life whenever they're just trying to play the game, but I'm not going to do that. So now everybody's kind of on an even level, or maybe you even have the advantage there. The Mimeoplasm, this guy's just incredibly strong. He's tried and true, and you can build him a plethora of different ways. Now, the budget will limit the broken stuff we're allowed to do here, but not by much. And honestly, if you build this guy with Infect, it's going to be strong no matter what. This is a guy, he's 2 generic, 1 black, 1 green, and 1 blue, and he says, as the Mimeoplasm enters the battlefield, you may exile 2 creature cards from your graveyard. If you do, it enters the battlefield as a copy of one of those cards, and it enters with a number of 1/1 counters on it equal to the power of the other. So you can do some really disgusting things with this guy. It's not hard to get this guy to 21 power and start one-shotting people, and if you give this guy Infect, it's really easy to get this guy to 10 power and then start one-shotting people. So I think this could be a very strong Voltron commander, and there's a lot of other stuff you can do to really take this guy to the next level, but I just wanted to show him and throw him up on the list, because I haven't built a Mimeoplasm deck, actually, but he is a super fun commander that I do want to get around to. Chishiro, this is also a super fun commander that just got thrown on the list because I want to build him. This is a 4 CMC legendary creature. He is in Gruul colors, and he says whenever an aura or equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you get to create a 2/2 red spirit creature token with menace. And then it says at the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 counter on each modified creature you control. So he makes your board progressively bigger. We can use auras to go ahead and get the backbone of the deck on the table, which is your card draw effects, all your ramp effects. There's a ton of ways to ramp and draw a ton of cards whenever you build an aura style deck, and then maybe we do throw in a couple of equipment to flesh it out, but at the end of the day, I think this could just be a very, very strong aura build. The budget's going to limit us a little bit because I would like to sacrifice those tokens to generate some sort of mana. We'll have to find our mana generation a different way because our Ashnod's altar effects are just super expensive. It's not going to happen, right? But I just wanted to put this guy on the list because he is a deck that I think could be very, very strong on a budget, and I would be excited to build him. Raggadragga, another deck that I just haven't got around to building, but does seem super fun. This is a 4 CMC Gruul commander, imagine that. He says each creature you control with a mana ability gets +2/+2, and whenever a creature you control with a mana ability attacks, untap it. So you always get to tap your creatures for mana. He also says whenever you cast a spell, if at least 7 mana was spent to cast it, untap target creature, it gets +7/+7 and gains trample until end of turn. Very, very busted with your effects that are able to tap for mana equal to their power. And then additionally, you throw in some X spells and it adds some flexibility to the deck because now you can turn those X spells into 7-cost spells whenever you want. And even if you don't have enough mana to make them 7-cost spells, they're still castable. So I think that's the trick with this guy, especially on a budget. You want the deck to be flexible. You don't want to shove a lot of 7 drops in there. I think X spells are going to be the way. Zurgo Stormrender. I just think this guy's really, really strong, and he's maybe even a little bit underrated. This guy's 1 red, 1 white, 1 black. He has Mobilize, which whenever this creature attacks, you get to create a tapped and attacking 1/1 warrior creature token, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, and then whenever a creature token you control leaves the battlefield, draw a card if it was attacking, otherwise each opponent loses 1 life. So this is an aristocrat strategy, but honestly, I just see Corvold here. You generate tokens, you sacrifice those tokens, you get to draw cards while dealing damage, right? Because we do want these creatures to be attacking. And anytime you can get a deck that draws cards by just sacrificing creatures, you're going to have a very, very strong commander. The only thing this guy needs to work is a sack outlet and creatures, and it's very easy to do that on a budget, and it's very easy to do that on a budget and come up with a very, very strong deck. Captain Howler, love this commander. I don't know if you guys have gotten a chance to play him, but he's just really, really fun. I built a Go deck with this guy, not budget, but I'll put it in the description for anybody that's interested because his ability does work for anybody's creatures and you do still get the card advantage, so it can kind of be messed up. But this guy is a 4 CMC creature in Izzet colors. He says whenever you discard one or more cards, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn for each card discarded this way. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player this turn, you draw a card. Now what's really busted about this guy is for every card you discard, they add that extra card draw ability on it. So let's say we discard 7 different cards with a card that says discard a card. That's going to give a creature +14/+0, and it's going to draw you 7 new cards whenever it deals combat damage. What's really cool about this is, again, you can buff your opponent's creatures, you can buff your creatures up. At the end of the day, all this guy needs is cards to discard and cards that allow you to discard, and a lot of those are budget. This could be, again, I think just very, very strong, and the game plan's not going to deviate very far from what the deck already wants to do, and that just makes a very strong budget commander. That's going to lead us into our next one, number 2, Yuriko. This one's just really strong, and I've never actually built a Yuriko deck, so I figured, hey, why not build a Yuriko deck and have it restricted by budget? Because if it's not restricted by budget, it kind of just ends up looking like a CEDH deck without all the fast mana and free counter magic. Yuriko is just disgusting. So if I ever built one, I would want it to be on an extreme budget or some restriction at least to keep it from looking like, okay, this is just a CEDH deck. Because if you guys have ever looked at a non-CEDH Yuriko list and looked at a CEDH Yuriko list, the only difference is you have the CEDH staples in one and the other one is just playing a lot of ninjas and maybe doesn't have the CEDH staples. They look very, very similar because the game plan is very similar even in the CEDH version. So again, if I ever built a Yuriko deck, I would want it to be on an extreme budget, and I think that would be a very fun way to build this commander, so I went ahead and threw it up on the list. Last but not least, I've been wanting to build this commander forever and just have not gotten around to it, but I think it could be a very, very strong budget commander. It's Tetzin Gnome Champion. This is a 3 CMC creature, 1 blue, 1 red, and 1 white. It says whenever Tetzin or another double-faced artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you get to mill 3 cards, then put an artifact card from among them into your hand. This is going to be a very, very strong storm commander. He also has a flip side, so we can actually flip this guy over, and it says whenever the Golden Gear Colossus enters the battlefield or attacks, transform up to 1 other target double-faced artifact you control, create 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens. Now that's not the broken part of this card, but there is some cards that take a lot of effort to flip over, and now we can just flip them instantly. I think the power in this guy is playing artifacts that you can reduce the cost of and then hopefully get that reduced cost to maybe 0, right? Eventually just making all of your artifacts free to cast, and then you make all of them double faced, and then you just throw as many on the battlefield as possible. Maybe you can end out the game with something like a Cyberdrive Awakener. We even got the red one recently. I forget the name of it, but it does something very similar to Cyberdrive Awakener. It reanimates all of your artifacts and will allow you to kind of take over the game and easily kill everybody with combat damage. Again, super fun commander. I think this guy's underrated also, even like without a budget. I think this could be a very, very strong bracket 3 deck, even bracket 4 if you throw in Underworld Breach effects. This could be a turbo breach deck. I have no doubt in my mind. With that being said, guys, don't forget to vote in the comments down below, and let's get another budget list on the channel.